Cold, a short story by Jim Lee, inspired by the upcoming video game No Man's Sky. Click, click, click. The battery is dead. I look at the frost gathered on the canopy, where the crystalline drawings silently sparkle in the beam of a morning sun which promises very little in the way of warmth in the coming day. I switch the ignition back to the off position and pop the latch for the engine compartment. I grab my multi-tool out of its storage holster and step out into the biting wind. The feeble warmth which had lingered from my slumber is ripped away by the icy blast which tears at me. Even through the thin gloves, the dull chill of the tool begins to greedily sap away the warmth from my fingers. Having no thermal protection left in my suit, I simply hunch my shoulders as much as I can to try to protect the vulnerable flesh of my neck and walk around to the front of the vehicle. I open the cowling. Slabs of ice, refrozen sheets of snow, which fell on the warm steel and melted as I slept, slide noisily down the incline, glancing off the corners of the canopy and falling to the ground with a couple of soft crunches. There is, of course, no one there to hear them, even if the sound were not being immediately drowned out beneath the howl of the endless storm. I wiggle the battery cables. They seem secure. I loosen the nut on the negative terminal and pull the cable free. The post on the battery and the inside of the cable's end are both smooth, gray lead. There is no corrosion on this connection. I put the cable down and begin to loosen the other nut. The corners of the hex nut are rounded with wear, and the wrench slips. I try to tighten the wrench using the knurled knob, but I can't grip it properly through the glove. I slip the glove off my right hand, and immediately icy needles sink into it as I squeeze the knob as tightly as I can. For a wonder, it is enough, and the nut comes free. I back it off a few turns and am able to free the cable from the post. A shower of yellowish-white powder rains down from the cable as I pull it free. The post of the battery is caked with more of the same, as is the cable's terminating block. I have no wire brush to clean it properly. Instead, after sliding my exposed hand back into the now chilled glove, I wrap it smartly against the steel wall of the compartment. I grip the battery post with the gloved hand, twisting back and forth to clean it as best as I can, and poke a finger through the circular gap in the cable and do the same. I make a mental note, reminding myself not to absent-mindedly rub my eyes with this hand before replacing the cables in reverse order. There's a small sizzle as the second cable makes contact, far too small, and my hope falls, but my choices are limited, and I press on. I close and seal the cowling and hurry back inside. Already, the leather seat has forgotten the warmth of my body. I close and seal the cowling and hurry back inside. Already, the leather seat has forgotten the warmth of my body, and I feel precious heat seeping out through the seat of my suit to warm the hide of the long-forgotten creature whose skin was harvested to upholster the captain's chair. I stare at the key. Please, let it be enough, I mutter. I slam the ignition into the on position, as though wishing the force of my action could somehow be transferred into the relays below the console and lend the sluggish electrons the additional power which might make the difference between life and death. I know full well that without the warmth the vehicle can generate, I will be measuring my life expectancy in terms of hours rather than years. I feel the vibration of the pre-ignition emitters, and then the smooth hum of the main engine fills the cabin. Seconds later, waves of blessed heat begin to course through the little capsule, which is my sole hope for survival in this hostile environment. The displays spring to life, and I can see by my fuel indicator that I still have half my capacity remaining. That is a measure of how long I have to locate an alternative source before my reserves are exhausted and this barren, icy ball of forgotten rock becomes my tomb. Warmth. I feel my body relax as the heat penetrates. I nudge the climate control up a couple ticks. It feels good, and I can feel the tension ebb slowly away as the fear of imminent death subsides. The feeble light of the world's star tries vainly to filter through the swirling cloud cover overhead, marking my third day in this place. My onboard computer had suggested there might be resources on this little world that I could gather, which could be readily converted into fuel for my pulse drive, as well as for my jump drive. The former is not terribly rare and is used for short hops within a local system. The latter, though, requires less abundant isotopes and is the lifeblood of my journey, as it powers my ability to leap the colossal gaps between the stars in the blink of an eye as I work my way slowly toward the galactic center. Why I might be headed there exactly is another matter. In truth, I don't recall just now how this journey began, or why I am trying so hard to reach that point. I am amazed by everything I see, but something inside me forbids laying down roots anywhere. I have not tried to construct a permanent shelter or home anywhere. Always I feel compelled to keep moving forward toward the cluster of light at the center of my galaxy's map. As I make my way, I'm able to transmit my findings, the places I have seen, the creatures I have located, and even evidence of other races of sentient beings long departed, leaving only confusing memories behind in metal and stone. Somewhere, these findings are being cataloged, but I do not know by whom or why. Indeed, I cannot even remember now ever having agreed to become a chronicler of this data. Yet, I know how to transmit my reports, detailing world after world. To keep them distinct, I try to name them. I make an effort to be descriptive in doing so. When I jump to this system, with only 3 frozen spheres hurtling slowly through wide orbits of this pale blue star, I was struck by the sense of isolation. At least, to my aesthetic sense, the very lighting of the place seemed forbidding and funereal. Half in jest, I tapped the name of the outermost world in the system into my databank. I named it Exile's Landing. Upon arrival, I began trying to search in a grid for the promised materials. My scanner has very limited range, and I thought this would be the most effective method to locate what I sought. But the first day went by without success. Of course, the harsh environment required that I not wander too far from my vessel. The climate compensators were chewing through the available energy stored in the suit's pack very quickly, trying to keep me warm. Ideally, I should like to upgrade it, but I hadn't yet found any way that I might accomplish that, as yet. As it was, I had to continually make my way back to the ship to recharge. On the second day, I had finished my search pattern, in all directions leading out from the ship. Still, I had found nothing. I decided to increase my search radius. The ship's computer had definitely pointed to this general area as the most likely place to find my supplies. Assuming I had simply been unlucky thus far, I widened my search. As it turned out, this had been a bad idea. All of the surfaces I had seen thus far had been barren rock, with an ever-shifting sheet of fine dust and snow pushed across it in the unceasing wind. So when I stepped onto the sheet of frozen liquid, I had no expectation that it might give way, and was thoroughly unprepared when it did. The liquid beneath the surface was not water. For that matter, neither was the snow. It was some substance which, apparently, had a freezing point just above the average surface temperature of the planet. Somewhere beneath the surface, perhaps, lay some heat source, some geothermal feature which had thawed a small pond's worth of the stuff, save for a thin crust over the surface, a crust which I plunged through. The liquid form of the substance was highly corrosive. If not for the suit, my body would have been destroyed instantly. Even so, the suit took some damage, despite being engineered for harsh environments. The built-in navigation unit in the left wrist winked out almost immediately. I managed to extricate myself from the little pond before containment was breached entirely, but the damage was done. I had gotten turned around in my panic and now had no sense of direction. Visibility was poor, as my helmet was slimed with the rapidly solidifying sludge. Panic squeezed my heart. The suit emitted a small, muffled beep, indicating that a quarter of its charge had been depleted. This was too soon to get such a warning. The corrosive liquid must have damaged another part of the suit as well. I wanted to sprint back toward the ship, but I now had no idea in which direction it lay, only an estimate of how far. If I set out recklessly in the wrong direction, I might get hopelessly lost, might run out of power and freeze. And of course, I had to watch my footing now. With a bit of effort, I was able to wipe away most of the cloudy liquid off of the faceplate. The local star had been almost perfectly overhead when I had fallen in, so I couldn't orient myself by that. I arbitrarily picked my 12 o'clock vector and began pacing off a search radius from this new point of origin, traveling outward the minimum distance I would need to travel before I should be able to make visual contact with the ship. I moved cautiously. The liquid, in its frozen state, took on a hue which was easily mistaken for the stone around it. But now that I knew what I was looking for, I could see the difference. On the first couple legs out from the hole I had made, I was obliged to turn back before long, as the way was barred by impassable widths of frozen liquid. It may have been more frozen than the patch I had stepped through, but I couldn't risk it. The place where I had fallen in was shallow. I might not be so lucky a second time. The suit sounded its warning when it was depleted to half power, and again at 1/4 power. I had no choice but to plod onward through my ordered course, hoping I would find my little refuge before the last of my heat was drawn away by the hungry wind. Shortly after the last quarter warning, the falling snow, which had only been flurried specks before, began to increase in size, and my visibility was cut in half. Great. The last trickle of power drained away, and I felt the click of a relay falling open as the suit's environmental compensator kicked out. Still, there was nothing for it but to press on. Of course, the energy is the thing that moves. It is heat leaving, not cold entering. All the while, though, this mental construct was of little comfort as I felt the cold slowly burrowing through the suit into my body. First through the fingers and toes, then, when those had been sucked dry, moving on, ever inward toward the core, toward my core. My gait became a stagger as I struggled to stay erect above numbed feet and numbing legs. The inside of my faceplate was becoming fogged. Little ice crystals began to appear around the periphery of my vision. Sunset, such as it was, had come and gone, and the last glimmer of pale blue from beyond the horizon had departed before I saw a tiny flash of white light in the distance, the beacon atop the vertical stabilizer fin of my ship. "It seems the exile doesn't die today," I muttered to myself as I trudged toward the light. I had been brushing briskly at myself for hours, trying to stimulate sensation in my extremities. This, combined with the rugged nature of the suit, which had prevented most of the liquid from getting in, resulted in very little of the stuff being brought into the ship with me. It was hydrophobic or something like that. I couldn't remember the details anymore. I got into the ship and fired up the engines. As the heat began to thaw me out, I tried connecting the charging coupler, but the console displayed an error. I couldn't read it through the fogged helmet, so I pulled that off. The suit had a fault, it said, and charging could not continue until this had been rectified. "Great," I grumbled. Exhausted, I had fallen asleep. When I awoke some hours later, the feeble sun had risen. The ship had shut down on its own at some point, probably some conservation directive programmed into it. Disgusted with the wasted effort of the previous 2 days, I had tried the ignition sequence, and that was when I discovered the electrical fault with the battery. Now I sat, wondering what to do, while a mounting despair continued to build in the back of my mind. I tried to force my thoughts in what I hoped was a more productive direction. At least I'm warm, I thought. But for how long? When not in motion, the ship didn't consume much fuel, but it wasn't no fuel. Eventually, I would need to find a fuel source or die. Had it always been like this? I couldn't remember. Now that I tried to concentrate, to think back to times before this place, I found I couldn't. There was nothing. I knew all sorts of vague things about the science and technology of my suit, of my ship, but I could not, for the life of me, recall when or where I had acquired that knowledge. I wondered if I had hit my head. I took my glove off, not wanting to get any of the residue from the battery terminal or liquid from the day before in my hair, and felt my scalp. I didn't remember hitting my head, but of course, if I had some form of amnesia, I might not. I felt nothing out of the ordinary on my head and put my glove back on. All of this existential nonsense would have to wait. I needed fuel. At least I wasn't hungry. I froze in horror. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. In fact, although I could not remember ever eating or drinking, I was not in the least bit peckish or parched. "What is this place?" I shouted. My ears rang from the reverberation of my shout in the tiny capsule. My heart beat hectically, and my hands shook as I tried to calm myself. No answer came. Okay, I have to relax, I thought. Obviously, I must have hit my head, or perhaps there was some psychoactive component in that fluid I fell into, or something which has affected my cognition. All the more reason why I need to find some fuel as quickly as possible while I still can, and make my way somewhere where there are people who can help me. That seemed a reasonable course of action. Just having some semblance of a plan calmed me, at least a little. So, how to implement it? Without suit power, how far could I wander from the ship? Not far enough to have it shut itself down again while I was gone, that was for sure. I was hopeful that the excess energy being generated by the engine would recharge the battery to full capacity, with the corrosion removed from the contacts, but was I willing to bet my life on it? No. Better to keep it running at all times than risk trying to start it up again and find myself unable to. This brought up another realization. I would have to sleep sometime. Unless the engines were powered up, or whatever the power save mode was configured to check, then it would shut down while I slept, just like last night. That meant I had to find fuel and get underway today. But I needed fuel to do that. And the display on the suit's portable scanner was kaput. So how? "The ship," I said aloud. "Clumsy as it might be, I'll have to search with the ship." It took a while, but eventually I got the hang of it. I could kick the engine up just a bit to hover a bit, fire off a scan, and then drop it back down without touching the ground. The ship's scanner would register the nearest signal only. All other signals were too attenuated to appear on the display. After about an hour and a half of jockeying around, I was directly above a strong signal. I made sure the ground was solid below before setting her down. I was fairly certain that goop wouldn't be good for the engines if I had another breakthrough. Bracing myself against the cold, to the extent possible, I grabbed my multi-tool and hopped out of the cabin and examined the ground under the ship. Nothing. Nothing but cold, bluish-gray stone with powder blowing across its surface. "Ah!" I shouted. I fired my weapon at the ground in frustration, making a little divot in the stone as little fragments of the material sprayed out around it. I looked for a moment at the tiny hole and sighed. "It's underground, stupid," I said to myself. I felt exceedingly foolish, having wasted 2 whole days looking and nearly dying in the bargain before grasping this fundamental and patently obvious fact. I switched the multi-tool to the continuous burn setting, effectively turning it into a mining laser. I couldn't have told you how I knew it could do this. I just knew, and began burrowing down through the rock just beside the place where I had hopped out of the ship. In this mode, I could burn continuously for several minutes, after which I would have to wait for the tool to both cool and recharge. The device had a self-contained fuel source, which would provide a narrow trickle of energy indefinitely. The laser consumes this energy at a higher rate than the source could provide, so it had a capacitive bank built into it, which allowed the collected energy to be dispensed at a high rate until exhausted, after which the trickle would immediately begin filling it back up. I was at it for quite some time. The star was well past its zenith, and I had just finished a burn and had begun waiting for the indicator on the tool to switch back to green so I could continue, when I heard a faint scraping sound from behind me. I turned, following the sound. About 100 meters away stood a massive creature. I wondered that something so large could have gotten as close as it had to me without making enough noise to alert me to its presence until now. Perhaps it had been curious about the unusual sound of the laser, splitting the air of this otherwise silent place. It looked, in appearance, like a large outcrop of the stone which was found everywhere. Its body was vaguely conical, about 10 meters in height and perhaps 18 meters in width at the base. The cone's shape was composed of numerous densely packed appendages angling down toward the ground like the edges of a tiny mountain. At rest, it would no doubt look exactly like such, as its coloring was a fair mimic of the planetary material, with a swatch of white across the top of what I now think of as its back, looking for all the world like a drift of the powdery snow. But it was not at rest. Instead of legs reaching down, the portion of the little mountain which faced me had 2 of these appendages raised upwards. The underside of each of these was jet black, and in each was set what appeared to be a glittering black eye. Below each eye was set the crack of a maw. I know this, for when it saw me turn toward it, these 2 mouths opened and unleashed a pair of ear-splitting roars, which rumbled at me as one. The cold wind was immediately forgotten, as my heart froze with terror. My weapon was useless, would continue to be useless for several more minutes. Meanwhile, the creature began lumbering toward me with horrifying speed, its many legs pistoning up and down, pounding the ground. In full charge, the sound was like a fusillade of cannon fire. I scrambled up into the capsule and fumbled through my supplies. I laid hold of a spherical metallic object. My mind whirled. This was a grenade of some type. I couldn't recall just now what it was for, but perhaps if I could startle the creature, I could persuade it to flee. I thumbed the actuator and hurled it toward the beast. As I did so, I thought, if this doesn't stop it, I'll have no choice but to abandon this site and flee in the ship. But what I shouted was, "Come get some, you freak!" It was a decent throw, as such things go. The little ball landed in a duff of powder some 30 meters away and bounced a couple times. The monster had already closed half the distance. I had a terrible moment of doubt as I wondered if the thing would somehow malfunction as certain doom continued to thunder toward me. Just as it reached the spot where the spheroid lay, though, there was a deep crump sound as the grenade exploded. There was an even deeper grinding sound as the fractured stone beneath it gave way, and suddenly the creature was gone. Though I could still hear it bellowing, the sound was muted as it fell to some unknown depth through the gulf which had been opened by the grenade. The sound stopped moments later as the creature struck bottom, along with all the dislodged stone, with a hideous cacophony of crashes. I made my way slowly to the edge of the newly forged abyss, careful to stay clear of the many cracks which now threaded through the surface. I did not wish to join my would-be assailant, tumbling to my death. As I approached the edge, I felt radiant warmth brush across my face. The air rising from the gulf was warm. In the gloom below, I could see crystalline nodules sticking out of the stone, glowing a dull crimson. These were the resources the scanner had picked up. A bed of them continued away from the hole in all directions, as far as I could see, and I never would have found them if not for the creature. I cautiously peered over the edge, directly down at the creature. It lay, still, splayed among the large chunks of stone, with its dull, lifeless black eyes staring back at me from each of its upturned legs. To live in this frozen environment like the fabled Yeti, big as a mountain, but with a multitude of legs like a centipede. And let's not forget the snowdrift atop its back. For some reason, a fragment of memory from somewhere sprang into my mind, some place lost in my amnesia. Mount Fuji. Fuji-Yetipede. Fuji-Yetipede. Thank you, Mr. Fuji-Yetipede. Your recklessness has saved my life, I said solemnly. After constructing a few more grenades, these with timers so I could set them more cautiously, I opened the hole up wide enough to accommodate the ship. Carefully, I set the craft down inside the welcoming, warm embrace of the subterranean cavern. In that warmth, I was able to shed my exosuit and make the necessary repairs. I filled my cargo hold with all of the extracted fuel I was able to carry, and gave the ship a full inspection before I finally climbed back into the cabin and closed the canopy. Even after all this work, I wasn't hungry. I hadn't sweated, nor was I thirsty at all. But I had a full hold of fuel. Surely someone somewhere could help set me right, help me figure out why I was here and what had happened. I just had to find them. I gently nudged the ship up through the triangular hole toward the night sky. Inside the confines of the ship, I was still toasty warm, despite the wind whipping by outside. I pointed the nose skyward and thumbed the burst button, propelling me out into the even colder void beyond. Somewhere out there are answers waiting, and I will find them, no matter how long it takes. Until then, the whole sky is mine to explore, I told the computer. I set the autopilot for the next star system. The display tells me there are 5 planets in orbit around that star. Perhaps one of them will be in a habitable zone. My sky, I mumbled as I drifted off to sleep, with the engine thrumming soothingly beneath me. And I am able to relax at last. My sky.
I've seen things. A few things before. Left the sun and moon behind. Galaxies waiting to be found. Planets rich in resources. Battles to be fought. Treasures unknown. A universe you wouldn't believe.
So until next time, this has been Jim at the Mid-Nite Drive-Thru saying thank you and drive through. And thanks for watching. All right, good.
Good. It's very good.
Now shut it off!